sure. Where would you like me to begin, I guess?
Can we start with the beginnings of the artist before we move into the sculptor? Let's talk about you as an artist. Your first love was drawing.
Yeah, the nice thing about drawing is that it's very immediate. I mean, for better or for worse, I was born into this. My mother is a painter, I guess. My father's a scientist, and I was always, I guess, cultured into expressing things physically. And I guess the most immediate thing for a child anyway to start is drawing. My mom always tells a story of when I was a baby still. She would sprinkle flour on a tray on a baking sheet and then let me make marks in it with my fingers. So I really started before I had any sort of self-awareness of it, and I've just grown through that.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me some of your earliest memories of you starting to be attracted to art in a serious way?
Okay. I've never been attracted to art in a serious way, which I guess sounds funny. I never made a conscious decision to do what I do, and I think again that stems from my really being born into this mode of existence. What I have isn't a career or a job, it's a life. What interests me are I guess the philosophical questions that I address through my work, and I don't contextualize that necessarily within the rubric of the art world or art history or theory or criticism. I find it much more interesting, just again from my personal perspective, to address these things as sort of a material philosophy, a way of thinking by making things.
Maskull, you have a background in philosophy, and some of your background is in philosophy. I wanted to ask you what kind of philosophy thinking influenced you the most?
Yeah, I do actually have an answer for that. It's one of the courses that I took was it had to do with Eastern philosophy, and I found that somehow a much more intuitive way of thinking about the world than the kind of rigorous deductive thinking that Western and sort of classical philosophers had. So without pretending to be an expert on any of this, the sort of Taoist thought, and that was something that really I was able to have a connection to. And it, again, I think it's very much through that approach that I come to my work. I have much more confidence in the things that I don't know than the things that I do know, and I'm happy to, or I'm exclusively interested in exploring those things through my work. If something has a completeness in my own mind, there's no reason for me to make it. It's the things that I'm uncertain about or that I don't understand. Those are the things that I really need to make.
I looked at your drawings and your earlier drawings, and I find that many of the topics were later translated in your sculpture. And I thought that we would talk a little bit about the drawings. The drawings are there's the same or the beginning of the dark humor that I'm seeing in your sculptures. I already see there, but also I see an awareness of the world around us. I'm seeing death. I'm seeing a very incisive way of and critical thinking of looking at the world. Am I close?
Yes.
Let's talk about the roadside.
Okay, yeah, I guess the people do or have or do, I guess, interpret my work often through a sort of morbidity or dark humor, I guess, if I'm lucky, and I think that's accurate to some extent. There's definitely a lightness with which I approach the work, even although a lot of the themes do seem outwardly maybe serious or even macabre. the Roadstill series it's a series of drawings I did based on roadkill. These were animals that I actually physically collected and froze, and then did drawings from them as still lives, I guess. Sort of another take on that epithet. It was again, from my perspective, a way of spending time with these little animals that had been forgotten on the side of the road, and sort of just a very private way for me to pay homage to the life that they had, you know, through this very sort of meditative, kind of intimate exercise of drawing them faithfully, you know, transferring their sort of mechanical presence onto a piece of paper as an image. So that's where that started. And from there, I mean, sculpture is really just a drawing done from many, many different angles. So, I mean, in my sort of internal thought, there's not a big distinction between drawing and sculpture when I think about it that way. I guess the other thing that influenced me a great deal was my experience playing the violin. I played the violin for about, I guess it was 14 years. And I think that probably equally with the philosophy was an influence in my work, and just really affected my way of perceiving the world and also interpreting and interacting with it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the musical instruments in your art. I did see the violin in your art, and the association or the way you merged pieces of violin with a sharp object. I always wondered, did he love violin?
Yeah, I guess there are two things to mention there. One is, yes, I always approach these things with a great deal of reverence for the musical instrument. If you see the show in Toronto, one of the pieces is a piano that has been
Crushed?
Well, no, it's not the one that's been crushed. It's been carved, actually. The piano that was crushed wasn't a piano. It's something that I made actually out of steel. It was a model of a piano that I made out of steel and then crushed it. In a similar way, the pieces that you mentioned, they weren't actually violins. These were pieces that I made just from blocks of wood that were designed and built and married with these other sharp instruments like a cleaver or like a handgun. These things were designed and built from scratch, and I think that's very important in my work, that I don't typically modify everyday objects other than through carving. What I actually do is I build these things from the ground up, so this way they have sort of ontological integrity. They are legitimate and authentic objects that have been designed and built with a unique purpose in mind. They aren't just adaptations of existing objects. They actually were brought into existence for the purpose that they now serve in this sort of sculptural assemblage of objects. And I think it's in many ways it's the biggest compliment when people look at my work and say, well, where did you find that? You know, and it takes a little bit of description sometimes to articulate the fact that these aren't found objects, they're actually made.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your choice of using body parts, specifically skeleton. You're showing bones and the torso to give life to your sculptures. Because when I see, when I see these bones, and to me, automatically, that sculpture becomes human. You know, that hanger with the bones, it becomes human. You humanize sculpture. Are you doing that, or is there another message?
No, again, I think that's exactly what it is. When the remnant of a life is imposed on an object, and that's true especially of the carving work that I do, it infers a past history or a previous life that had been lived, you know. So again, where people see my work as macabre, I often see it as hopeful, or as the remnants of a life. So despite the fact that life's ended, at least that life had a beginning and a middle as well. So often by imparting sort of these bodily elements to otherwise inanimate objects, it reclaims or reanimates them even in a virtual way.
You are using specific parts of the body. Is it an instrumental choice? Is there a message behind it, the way you choose these parts?
Yeah, there are a number of reasons. One is the sort of mechanical intricacy of bones and skulls and skeletons in general. There's a nice analogy between that and sort of the functional mechanisms that we live with in our everyday lives, like furniture and these other things. They're both built to serve a very specific purpose, and they've both been refined over many, many years. And in the case of skeletons, millennia of sort of incremental adjustments and improvements to suit their purpose, as well as nature has managed to achieve. And there's, in my mind, an equivalence between engineered objects and evolved objects. And by bringing those two together, I hope to sort of illuminate both the similarities and differences there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was so much a shift as a broadening of my interest. So there's something nice about sculpture in that it exists in the three-dimensional present. It has to obey all of the laws of physics and everything else that other objects in our existence have to obey. And that gives me parameters within which to work. So there's something nice about having boundaries to push against, and drawing in many ways doesn't have that. On a blank page, there are any number of possibilities that could be realized, and it's honestly a little bit daunting in many ways. So what I tend to do now is I tend to make drawings of things that are not possible to be made, but the things that are possible to make, I'd rather make them than draw them.
Mm-hmm. Your most recent exhibition that's actually still going on in Toronto, what is the theme of this exhibition?
Right. So the exhibition is called Fable. I guess there are many layers of theme that you could explore. In the most obvious material sense, all of the works there are carving. They're all carving into non-traditional substrates, I guess. So carving into furniture and instruments and implements, tools, I guess. My rationale there, and as far as I have a rationale, is just to explore the hidden potential of the material that is otherwise used and sort of anticipated as a function. So where I carve into a door and a rolling pin, I carved the skeleton of a rat. This skeleton sort of infers a narrative that joins these two objects, where if there was no motif carved into them, they would just have this sort of incidental relationship. There's something also really nice about the sort of humility of carving. There's no magic, there's no black box technique by which these sculptures came into being. It's all very obvious what they are, like a violin and a case, or two woodworking planes, or a piano, or a chair and an axe. All of these are objects that are obvious and familiar to people, but then just by subtracting some of that material, I was hoping to reveal a different potential. And hopefully by doing that in these objects, it's possible sort of to infer this awareness in other everyday objects in our daily existence.
You mentioned that you started as a carver and then you became a sculptor. When does a carver who becomes a sculptor knows that he is an artist?
There are a lot of words there. First of all, I didn't really start as a carver, and I work very hard, just I guess in terms of my approach to everything, not to attach too many titles to what it is that I do. So I find my work much more interesting when I don't think of it as a carving or a sculpture or I mean, the word I stay away, as far away from as I possibly can, doing what I do is artist, because that's a title that I find, in terms of my own relationship with what I do, it's not a constructive way for me to think about my functioning as a being in this world that generates these objects just as a byproduct of life. So what I really work to do, and the work that I find most interesting when I achieve it, is to really dissolve the boundaries between sort of tool and sculpture and life and I guess artwork. And when these boundaries are dissolved, interesting relationships get made that would be prevented if I sort of pigeonholed myself into a specific category. So really what I try to do is live an undifferentiated existence where the practical and the aesthetic modes of being that I exist through don't have hard-edged boundaries. It takes effort to do that, and I'm not always successful, but it's definitely what I strive to do. The downside is it makes it difficult for me to talk about my work as an artwork or as a sculpture, as a carving. I mean, these are really distinctions that I haven't fleshed out in my own thinking, so it's difficult for me to articulate them in those terms.
You were talking about dissolving the boundaries between man or human and the tools that he or she is using. So can I look at all these instruments that you use as becoming part of you, as being your limbs?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think through my hands, and I think through the tools that I use. So when I'm fabricating something out of steel and I'm holding a welding torch in my hand, I think differently than when I'm carving something out of another object, and I think differently again through my pencil that I'm drawing with. So each one of these is an extension very much of my being, and I think as I grow through my practice and as I become more adept at the activities that I do, I think it becomes more and more seamless, this extension of myself through the mechanism by which I create. So that's in a functional way, but also in terms of just the material work that I make. Often I make my own tools, and then often I turn my tools into sculpture. So there's this sort of slippage or seepage between pragmatic realms and creative realms, and I guess that's really the exchange and the interchange that I find very, very interesting.
Is there a medium that you prefer, let's say wood over steel, or is there a medium that you feel more attached to?
I mean, again, like the way I think through the different tools that I use, that the medium has to find a happy home in the subject that I'm interested in exploring. So some things find their home in wood, some things find their home in steel, and my job is really just to mediate the idea into a material. So again, what I try very hard to do is just to listen to what the idea or the intent or the impulse I have is telling me, and then try to find it a match in a material. And again, the less that I'm bound to favorites or preferences, the more sort of transparent I am to these different materials and processes, I think the more honestly I can manifest an idea in the material that makes most sense for it. Like some ideas kind of draw to a convergence, they converge, or they draw to a conclusion in language, and then those are the ideas that need to be written. Some converge in images, those are the ones that need to be photographed or drawn, and some only converge in materials and in objects, and those are the ideas that I think I draw on to be the subject and the content of my sculptures.
Mm-hmm. You and your art really have become one, and I often think and wonder about the artist. I know you get this liberating feeling from creating, but I always wonder, can an artist ever feel trapped in their own art?
Yes, and I think again it has to do with, I mean, just internally to one's own being, how one structures and organizes their own perception of themselves and the ego and everything else. So there are innumerable pitfalls and traps, I'm sure, in terms of this life. I mean, people have lived it before and they've made good and bad decisions, but really what I try to do through my work is to disappear through it. I mean, I'm really in search of invisibility behind my work. I'm not interested in standing beside it or in front of it and explaining or justifying it. I put myself into the work so I don't have to be there anymore. So really, in some sense, I work to become invisible. I'm not sure if that makes sense when I say it, but I mean it feels sincere as a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question about being trapped in that. As long as I'm listening to the work and as long as I'm the servant of the material and the process, then I'm freed by it. The only time that I feel trapped is when I'm trying to impose something, when I'm trying to impose an idea or impose a direction that isn't being accepted by the work itself. And that's something, as I progress through my practice, something I do less and less.
Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Or how?
Probably see myself exactly as I am now. You know, I mean, the scenery might change, but I'm extremely lucky. I mean, I am able to do this full time, and I work very hard at what I do. But I have also been given all of the advantages that anyone could hope to have been given. So I just would like to try to continue to work hard enough to deserve what happens. So if I have the next 10 years have been, or if they're able to be as positive and sort of rewarding and productive as the last 10 years, and I'll be very happy.
Mm-hmm. To our listeners, Maskull's website is maskull.com. Maskull, would you like to spell your website name? The name?
Sure, absolutely. It's MASKULLLASSERRE.
There's another exhibition coming in January in Montreal, I believe.
Sorry. Yeah, the exhibition in January is actually in Chicago. At the DePaul Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another one in St. John, New Brunswick, at Third Space Gallery.
Mm-hmm. Maskull, thank you so much for being with us today, and I very much hope to get to the gallery in Toronto and video record and then post it on YouTube for the viewers to enjoy your art. And I wish you all the best in the future. You are a very productive, very creative sculptor and artist.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.